It was almost midnight. The sky was dark, and the cold wind howled through the empty road. Billionaire Bryan Cole sat in the back of his luxury black SUV, tired after a long business meeting. Welcome to Hearts and Billions, where the rich meet the broken, and one moment changes everything. Love, loss, redemption, all in one story. Subscribe to feel every heartbeat. He looked out the window. Nothing but trees and darkness. His driver had dropped him off earlier to take another route, and now Bryan was alone. The car had suddenly stopped. The engine made a strange noise, then went completely silent. He sighed and stepped out, shivering in the cold. He kicked the tire, annoyed. He tried calling for help, but there was no signal. No driver, no staff, just him and the cold night. "I don't have time for this," he muttered. He popped the hood and stared at the engine like it was written in another language. He had no idea what to do. Then, out of nowhere, a voice came from the shadows. "Need help, sir?" Bryan turned quickly. Standing near the bushes was a small boy, maybe 11 years old. His clothes were dirty, torn, no shoes on his feet. He held a small flashlight and a rusty toolbox. Bryan frowned. "Where did you come from?" The boy stepped forward slowly. "I sleep near the old factory. I heard your car. Thought you might need help." Bryan looked him up and down, unsure. "You fix this?" The boy nodded with quiet confidence. "I can try." Before Bryan could answer, the boy got to work. He moved like someone who had done this many times. With small hands and makeshift tools, he adjusted wires, cleaned something with his sleeve, and tapped a few spots carefully. Within minutes, the engine coughed and then started. Bryan stared, speechless. His car was working again. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick bundle of money. "Here, take this. You've earned it." But the boy shook his head. "No, thank you. I just didn't want you to freeze out here." And before Bryan could say another word, the boy disappeared into the darkness. Bryan stood there, still holding the money in his hand. The boy was gone, just like that. He looked around, confused. Where did he go? It didn't make sense. That child had just saved him without asking for anything. No name, no thanks, nothing. Bryan climbed back into the car. The engine hummed softly now, steady and strong. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, but he wasn't moving. Something inside him didn't feel right. He had met thousands of people in his life, millionaires, CEOs, politicians, but not one of them had helped him like that little boy just did with nothing to gain. He shook his head and started driving, but as the road curved, his headlights caught something up ahead, movement in the trees. He slowed down. There off to the side, past some broken fencing, was a tiny shack made of wood, plastic sheets, and pieces of rusted metal. Bryan pulled over and stepped out. The night was cold and silent. He walked closer, carefully. Through a gap in the wall, he saw the boy again. He was lighting a small fire using dry leaves and cardboard. Inside the shack, lying on the floor, was a woman, his mother, maybe. She was coughing softly, her arms wrapped around a toddler. The boy placed his only blanket over the toddler, then sat down beside his mother and held her hand. No complaints, no tears, just quiet love. Bryan stepped back slowly, heart heavy. This child had nothing yet gave everything. He looked down at the money still in his hand. For the first time in a long while, he felt ashamed. And right there, standing in the dark, watching that broken little family try to survive, Bryan Cole made a silent promise. "I'm coming back." The next morning, Bryan couldn't stop thinking about the boy. He sat in his fancy office, surrounded by glass walls, leather chairs, and people rushing around. But his mind wasn't there. His thoughts were still on that cold shack in the woods. He stared out the window, remembering the boy's eyes, so calm, so focused, like someone who had grown up too fast, someone who carried the weight of the world without complaint. Bryan reached for his phone, but stopped. No address, no phone number. He didn't even know the boy's name. That afternoon, he got back in his car and returned to the same road. He drove slowly this time, scanning the trees until he saw the little shack, hidden behind the factory ruins. He parked, grabbed the envelope he had prepared, and stepped out. Inside the envelope was a large sum of cash, enough to feed the family for months. He also brought 2 bags, one with food, the other with warm clothes. He approached the shack carefully. This time, the boy saw him coming. The boy stood up quickly, nervous. "Is your car broken again?" Bryan smiled a little. "No. This time, I came to see you." The boy looked confused. Bryan handed him the envelope. "You helped me last night. I want you to have this, for your family." The boy took the envelope slowly. He opened it, saw the money, and immediately handed it back. "We don't take money," he said softly. Bryan blinked. "But why?" "This could help." The boy shook his head. "My mum says if we take money without working for it, we'll forget how to fight." Bryan knelt down, looking the boy in the eyes. "But you did work for it. You fixed my car. You saved me." The boy thought for a moment, then looked at the food bag instead. "Can I take the bread?" he asked shyly. "For my sister. She's really hungry." Bryan felt his chest tighten. He nodded. "Take everything." The boy smiled just a little, and it was the kind of smile that stays with you forever. Bryan stood up, speechless. He had never met someone so poor, and yet so rich in pride. As he walked back to his car, he whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Bryan couldn't sleep that night, even in his expensive bed, in a warm penthouse high above the city. All he could see was that boy's face, and the broken shack he called home. He had seen many things in his life: wars, hunger, betrayal, but something about that child hit differently. That strength, that quiet dignity, and the way he refused the money like it meant nothing. It made Bryan think of something he hadn't thought about in years: his own childhood. The small, cold apartment he grew up in. The nights he went to bed hungry. The mother who worked 3 jobs. The little boy who used to cry in secret, just like that child probably did now. The next morning, Bryan made a decision. "I need to know more," he told his driver. "Take me back." This time, he didn't just bring food. He brought a doctor, a heater, a power bank, new clothes, and a box full of children's books and medicine. They drove through the muddy road again, but as they approached the shack, it was empty. No fire, no sounds, no boy. Bryan's heart dropped. He stepped out and walked around. Then he noticed small footprints in the dirt leading away from the shack, toward a nearby scrapyard. "Let's go," Bryan said quickly. "Follow the tracks." They passed rusted cars, broken machines, and piles of metal. Finally, they heard something. Clang, clang, click. Bryan turned a corner and there he was. The boy, working again. He had built something from scrap. Metal, a cart with wheels, and a place to carry water. He was testing it, carefully tightening bolts with his tiny hands. Bryan just stood there for a moment, watching. This kid wasn't waiting for help. He was out there, building it. "Hey," Bryan finally called out. The boy looked up, surprised. "You came back." Bryan smiled gently. "I told you I would." The boy pointed to the cart. "This is for my mum. She can't carry heavy things anymore." Bryan swallowed hard, his voice shaky. "What's your name, kid?" The boy looked down shyly, wiping grease off his face. "Jayden," he said. And right then, Bryan knew. He wasn't just going to help this boy. He was going to protect him. The next morning, before the sun rose, Bryan was already on the road with a plan. He had spent the night thinking about Jayden. The boy was strong, yes, but no child should have to be that strong. Not at that age. Not when he should be playing, laughing, and dreaming. Bryan didn't want to scare them or make them feel like charity cases. So this time, he came quietly, in a regular car, wearing simple clothes. No suit, no driver. He parked near the shack and knocked gently on the wooden panel. Jayden peeked out. His eyes widened when he saw Bryan holding 2 large food bags and a tray of hot breakfast. Jayden stepped outside, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't have to come again." Bryan smiled. "I wanted to." He laid out the food on a blanket. Warm bread, scrambled eggs, fruits, and a big thermos of tea. Jayden's little sister came crawling out of the shack, yawning, and smiled at the smell. Bryan helped her sit down and poured her tea. She giggled. It was the first time he had heard laughter in this place. Jayden's mother tried to sit up, but coughed hard. Bryan rushed to her side. "Easy, don't worry. I brought a doctor. He's waiting nearby." She shook her head weakly. We don't need pity." Bryan gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "This isn't pity. It's respect. You've raised a boy who fixed my car better than my own mechanic. The world needs to know him." She looked at Jayden, who was now feeding his sister with tiny pieces of bread. A small, tired smile appeared on her lips. When breakfast was done, Bryan sat down on a wooden crate beside Jayden. The moment felt calm, real. He looked at the boy and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Jayden nodded. "How did you learn to fix cars?" Jayden looked down. "My dad taught me." Before he left, he said machines listen better than people. Bryan didn't know what to say. He just nodded, heart sinking. Jayden added quietly, I liked fixing things. It makes me feel useful. Bryan's voice softened. You are more than useful, Jayden. You're brilliant. Jayden didn't respond. He just kept feeding his sister, piece by piece. But in that silence, something changed. A bond had begun, one that would grow into something none of them could imagine. Back in the city, high above the noise and glitter, Bryan sat alone in his penthouse. But his mind wasn't there. He stared at the big window that overlooked the skyline, but all he could see was a small boy in torn clothes, fixing a broken machine with steady hands. That look in Jayden's eyes, it wasn't just skill, it was survival. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Then he walked over to his desk and pulled out a small box. It was dusty, pushed far back under his files. Inside were old photographs. He hadn't opened it in years. He picked up a picture himself, age 10. Standing beside a broken-down bike in front of a tiny apartment. His shoes were too big, his shirt had holes, but in his eyes, there was the same fire he had seen in Jayden. He remembered those days clearly now. His father had left. His mother worked at a laundry, came home with her hands raw. He used to fix things not because he loved it, but because they couldn't afford anyone else. The heater, the tap, the toaster, it all depended on little Bryan. And when he finally made it big, he made a promise to himself, never look back. But now, after meeting Jayden, he realized he had looked away too long. He turned on his home security screen and opened the footage from the night his car broke down. There it was, the moment Jayden stepped out of the shadows, the way he moved, the way he refused the money, the quiet strength. Bryan paused the video and zoomed in on Jayden's face. For a long time, he just stared. Then, without warning, tears filled his eyes. That was me, he whispered. That boy was me. He sat down heavily, covering his face with his hands. The walls around him, glass, marble, and gold, suddenly felt cold and hollow. All his wealth, yet he had forgotten what truly mattered. But not anymore. He wiped his eyes, picked up his phone, and made a call. Prepare the guest wing. Bring in child clothes, school materials, and someone who can handle adoption paperwork. The assistant on the other end paused. Sir, adoption. Bryan looked out the window again, voice steady. I'm not losing that boy to the streets. The next morning, Bryan was up earlier than his staff, earlier than his usual meetings. But today wasn't about business. Today was about Jayden. He packed his own car. No assistants, no drivers. Just him and a back seat filled with groceries, vitamins, medicine, shoes, jackets, books, and a few small toys. Things a child might like, but Bryan wasn't sure. He had never shopped for a kid before. As he drove back to the old factory road, his heart beat faster. He wasn't nervous. He was hopeful. He had made up his mind. Jayden and his little sister were going to have a better life. He would make sure of it. When he arrived, Jayden was outside, washing a metal bucket. His little sister sat nearby playing with a broken spoon, making imaginary tea in a rusty tin cup. Jayden looked up, surprised, but this time, he smiled. You came back again. Bryan nodded. Told you I would. He got out of the car and opened the trunk. Jayden's eyes widened. His sister gasped. Bryan started pulling things out. Fresh bread, warm milk, blankets, raincoats, a teddy bear. Jayden didn't say anything, but his eyes said everything. Then Bryan knelt down and looked him in the eyes. I want to help you properly, Jayden. You and your sister. Your mother needs real care. You need school, a safe place to sleep, a warm bed. I can give you all of it. Jayden looked away. Bryan added gently, you wouldn't owe me anything. No tricks, just a chance to live better. Just then, the mother stepped outside, holding on to the doorway for balance. Her face was pale, her voice thin, but her eyes were still sharp. We appreciate the kindness, Mr. Cole, she said softly, but we don't take charity. Bryan stood up. Ma'am, this isn't charity, it's respect. Your son saved me, and not just my car. She coughed and leaned against the wood. I've seen men like you before, she said. They come, they feel sorry for a day or two, then they leave. Bryan's voice didn't waver. I won't leave. Jayden looked between them, unsure. Then his mother said quietly, if you really want to help us, don't make promises you won't keep. Bryan nodded slowly. Then I'll start by keeping one. He handed her a small envelope, not with money, but with a handwritten note. On it was a list, a doctor's appointment already booked, a house prepared for them, and a school that had already agreed to admit Jayden tuition paid. Jayden looked at the paper, then up at Bryan. His voice was small, but steady. "Why would someone like you do this? For someone like me?" Bryan knelt again, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Because once I was you." Later that evening, the wind picked up. The shack creaked as cold air slipped through its weak walls. Jayden wrapped his little sister in the only blanket they had, then sat beside his mother, who had fallen asleep again, her breathing soft and shallow. He stared at the doorway, replaying Bryan's words in his head. "Because once I was you." No one had ever said something like that to him before. People usually looked at Jayden like he was nothing, like he was invisible. But Bryan Cole looked at him like he mattered. Still, Jayden didn't know what to feel. Could he trust this man? Would he really come back? Or would he disappear, like so many others had? As the sky darkened, Jayden heard something outside. He stepped out quietly and found no one there, but near the door was a box, clean, sealed, and tied with string. Beside it sat a thermos of soup, still warm. No note, no knock, no noise. He opened the box slowly. Inside were things he had never seen up close. Soft clothes, real shoes, a toothbrush with his name written in pen, a small notebook, and a folded blanket that smelled like lavender. At the very bottom, he found a small silver flashlight. Not broken, not rusted, brand new. Jayden's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just the items, it was the silence. No cameras, no speeches, just quiet care. He called softly to his mum. She woke with effort and looked inside the box, her lips trembling. "He brought this for us," she whispered. Jayden nodded. His sister reached out and hugged the teddy bear, holding it close like it was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to her. They ate the soup together in silence. Jayden didn't say much, but that night, before bed, he placed the new flashlight under his pillow, not for protection but as a sign. Maybe this time, someone really meant what they said. Maybe this time, they weren't alone. A few days later, Bryan returned, but this time, he wasn't carrying food or gifts, he was carrying a new beginning. He stepped out of the car dressed simply, but there was a warmth in his eyes. Behind him, a nurse helped Jayden's mother into a medical van. She was finally being taken to a real hospital, one with clean beds, heating, and proper doctors. Jayden held his little sister's hand as he watched his mother being gently lifted inside. "You'll see her soon," Bryan promised. "She's going to rest now and get better." Jayden didn't reply. He just nodded quietly. Then Bryan knelt beside him. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" Bryan opened the back door of his car. Inside was a backpack, new shoes, and a uniform navy blue and white, clean pressed. "You're going to school." Jayden stared at it, like it was a dream. His fingers trembled as he touched the shirt. "But I've never been to school." Bryan smiled. "That's about to change." That morning, they drove through a part of the city Jayden had never seen. Wide roads, tall buildings, children in bright uniforms walking with parents. He watched everything from the window in silence, clutching his backpack. Finally, they arrived. The school was huge. Clean walls, tall gates, a playground with bright-colored swings. Jayden froze. He looked down at his clothes. He still didn't feel like he belonged. "Everyone's rich here," he whispered. Bryan put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not here because of what you wear, Jayden. You're here because you belong." Inside the school, students whispered and stared. Some pointed at him, others laughed under their breath. Jayden heard someone say, "Is that the kid Mr. Cole found in the streets?" He felt small, out of place, like he was walking into a world built for someone else. He looked back at Bryan, eyes full of doubt, but Bryan gave him a nod. Just one simple, steady, "Go, you've got this." Jayden took a deep breath and stepped into the classroom. At first, it was hard. The lessons were fast. The math felt like another language. His shoes were too tight. His hands shook when he had to speak in front of the class. But when he opened his notebook and picked up his pencil, something inside him came alive. He began to draw, machines, ideas, tools. His mind moved like an engine, and soon, the teacher noticed. By the end of the day, Jayden walked out of the building not smiling, not yet, but walking taller. As he climbed into the car, Bryan looked at him and asked, "So?" Jayden looked out the window for a moment, then whispered, "It's hard, but I want to go back." And that was all Bryan needed to hear. A week later, Bryan walked into the top floor of his company headquarters, sharp suit, firm steps, but his mind wasn't on business as usual. He had called an emergency board meeting. Every executive, every investor, every important person in his billion-dollar empire was seated around the massive glass table. They were whispering when he walked in. Did he cancel the Singapore deal? I heard he's sponsoring some street kid. He's changing to soft. Bryan stood at the head of the table and spoke clearly. I've brought someone with me today. The room went silent as the elevator doors opened behind him. Jayden stepped out, dressed in a neat blazer, his hair combed, eyes wide. He held a small bag with papers. He had worked on himself, diagrams of tools he had drawn, ideas he had imagined, machines made from scraps. The room stared. Whispers started again. Who is he? A relative. Bryan raised a hand, stopping them. This is Jayden, a boy I met by accident, but he reminded me of everything I forgot. One man laughed under his breath. Sir, is this another charity project? Bryan turned to him. No, this is the future. He gestured for Jayden to step forward. Jayden looked nervous. His hands trembled. But then he opened his bag, pulled out his drawings, and placed them on the table. I built this from trash, he said softly, pointing to a water cart that could be pushed on rough roads. I drew this to help my mum walk better when she was sick. The room was silent. The coup cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, with all due respect, what does this have to do with our bottom line? Bryan looked around the table, calm but firm. You all want numbers, profits. I want purpose. This company started because I once had nothing. I built it with ideas just like this boy has. He looked down at Jayden, then back up. And starting today, I'm building a program, the Jayden Initiative, to find children like him, with minds that have never been given a chance. More whispers, a few frowns, but also quiet nods. Bryan smiled. If any of you have a problem with that, feel free to resign. No one moved. Jayden looked up at him, eyes wide with shock. Bryan leaned down and whispered, You didn't just earn a seat in this building, Jayden. One day, you're going to run it. A few days later, Jayden was doing his homework in the mansion's library when his pencil suddenly stopped moving. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him felt cold. His heart started to race. He looked out the window at the quiet city. Something wasn't right. Bryan walked in, holding a tray of snacks. You've been at it for hours. Take a break. Jayden turned to him, eyes serious. Can we go to the shack? Bryan frowned. Now, why? I don't know. Jayden said softly. I just need to. Bryan didn't question him. They left immediately. The car sped down the familiar road, but this time the wind felt heavier. The sky was dull, grey, like it was mourning something. Jayden pressed his face against the window as they neared the shack. He could already tell something was wrong. They stopped. Jayden jumped out of the car and ran. The door to the shack was half open. His little sister sat on the floor, holding the teddy bear tightly. Her face was wet with tears. Jayden rushed inside and froze. His mother lay still on the mattress. Her chest wasn't rising. Her hands were cold. Bryan stepped in slowly, heart sinking the moment he saw her. Jayden didn't cry. Not at first. He just knelt beside her and placed her hand in his. I told you I'd come back, he whispered. His voice cracked. Then the tears came, quiet, broken sobs that shook his entire body. Bryan knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. He didn't say anything. There were no words for this kind of pain. The little girl crawled over and hugged Jayden from behind. He wrapped his arms around her tightly. After a while, Bryan said softly, I'll take care of you both. I promise. Jayden looked up at him. A few days later, Jayden was doing his homework in the mansion's library when his pencil suddenly stopped moving. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him felt cold. His heart started to race. He looked out the window at the quiet city. Something wasn't right. Bryan walked in, holding a tray of snacks. You've been at it for hours. Take a break. Jayden turned to him, eyes serious. Can we go to the shack? Bryan frowned. Now, why? I don't know. Jayden said softly. I just need to. Bryan didn't question him. They left immediately. The car sped down the familiar road, but this time the wind felt heavier. The sky was dull, grey, like it was mourning something. Jayden pressed his face against the window as they neared the shack. He could already tell something was wrong. They stopped. Jayden jumped out of the car and ran. The door to the shack was half open. His little sister sat on the floor, holding the teddy bear tightly. Her face was wet with tears. Jayden rushed inside and froze. His mother lay still on the mattress. Her chest wasn't rising. Her hands were cold. Bryan stepped in slowly, heart sinking the moment he saw her. Jayden didn't cry. Not at first. He just knelt beside her and placed her hand in his. "I told you I'd come back," he whispered. His voice cracked. Then the tears came quiet, broken sobs that shook his entire body. Bryan knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. He didn't say anything. There were no words for this kind of pain. The little girl crawled over and hugged Jayden from behind. He wrapped his arms around her tightly. After a while, Bryan said softly, "I'll take care of you both. I promise." Jayden looked up at him, eyes red but steady. "She said I could trust you now," he whispered. "So I will." That night, Bryan didn't return to his penthouse. He stayed in the shack with Jayden and his sister, sitting in silence beside a candle, the three of them sharing one blanket, hearts shattered but together. In that moment, they weren't billionaire and orphans. They were simply a family in grief. The next few days passed like a blur. Jayden and his sister stayed at Bryan's mansion, but their hearts were heavy. The halls were quiet. Meals were left untouched. Jayden barely spoke. He spent most of his time sitting by the window, holding the silver flashlight Bryan had once given him. Staring into nothing, Bryan gave them space. He knew grief had no shortcut, but he was always close by, always watching, always ready. One morning, Jayden sat at the breakfast table with his sister in his lap. She was drawing with crayons. He wasn't eating, just slowly spinning his spoon. Bryan sat across from him. After a moment, he spoke gently. "Jayden, I'd like to talk to you about something important." Jayden looked up, tired but listening. Bryan continued, "I know you've lost a lot, and I know no one can replace your mum, but I want to give you both a home, a real one, not just a place to sleep, but a family." Jayden didn't answer right away, so Bryan said the words clearly. "I want to adopt you." Jayden froze. His eyes filled slowly, not with fear, not with sadness, with shock. "You really mean it?" Bryan reached across the table and held his hand. "I don't just want to help you from a distance, Jayden. I want to raise you, teach you, protect you. I want to be the person your mum hoped would come along." Jayden's voice shook. "Do you think she would have said yes?" Bryan smiled gently. "She already did. The day she said you could trust me." Jayden blinked away tears, then looked down at his sister still drawing. She had drawn a stick figure family, a boy, a girl, and a tall man with spiky hair. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered. "We'll be your kids." The next week, papers were signed. Lawyers handled the details. A judge sat in a quiet courtroom and looked down at the man and the boy before him. "This isn't the kind of adoption we see every day," the judge said. "But sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about choice." He stamped the papers. "Welcome home, Jayden Cole." Outside, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. News spread fast. "Billionaire adopts street boy who once fixed his car." The internet exploded with opinions. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others said it was fake. But Jayden didn't care what the world thought, because for the first time in his life, he was no longer alone. At first, it felt like a fairy tale. Jayden had a warm bed. His sister had a nursery. They both had their own toothbrushes for the first time. They could laugh without worrying, sleep without cold, and eat without counting bites. But outside the mansion walls, the world had opinions. Why would a billionaire adopt a random street boy? He's just doing this for attention. That kid's probably going to ruin the company. The internet was loud. News articles popped up everywhere. Talk shows debated Bryan's motives. His face appeared on magazine covers next to headlines like, "From boardroom to babysitter. Is Bryan Cole losing his edge?" Even his own investors grew nervous. Shares dipped slightly. Partners whispered entering meetings. One executive even said to his face, "You used to think clearly, Bryan, now you're bringing a kid to strategy meetings." Bryan stayed calm, but the words stung. At home, Jayden noticed the change. Bryan's phone rang more often. His meetings grew longer. He smiled less. One evening, Jayden overheard two men in suits talking near the study. "This kid is a distraction. We didn't sign up to run a daycare." Jayden quietly closed the door and walked away. He felt it in his chest, that familiar ache. like he didn't belong. That night, he went to Bryan's room and stood in the doorway. Bryan looked up from his laptop. "What's wrong?" Jayden hesitated, then whispered, "Am I making things worse for you?" Bryan put his laptop down immediately. "No. Why would you say that?" Jayden looked at the floor. "People don't like me. They think I'm a mistake." Bryan walked over, knelt down, and placed his hands on Jayden's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are not a mistake. You are a miracle. Let them talk. I don't care if the whole world misunderstands me because I understand you." Jayden's eyes filled again. "But what if they make you choose between me and your company?" Bryan smiled sadly. "Then the company will have to go." The next morning, Bryan held a press conference. He stepped up to the podium, surrounded by flashing cameras and skeptical faces. He looked straight at the reporters and said, "I didn't lose my mind when I adopted Jayden. I found my heart. This boy didn't ruin my life. He reminded me of what matters. And if that scares my investors, so be it." There was silence. Then one camera light clicked. Then another. Slowly, some people started to clap. Back home, Jayden watched the broadcast on the TV with his sister beside him. He smiled for the first time that day, because now he knew, no matter what the world said, Bryan had chosen him, and he wasn't going back. The dust from the headlines began to settle. Some people still talked, some still doubted, but Bryan didn't care anymore. He had a new mission now, and it started with a boy who once fixed his broken car with tools made from trash. One morning, Jayden woke up to the sound of construction outside the mansion. He looked out the window and saw workers putting up a large sign, "The Jayden Initiative, a future for hidden geniuses." Bryan stood beside the crew, directing things himself. Jayden ran downstairs, barefoot, and asked breathlessly, "What's this?" Bryan smiled. "This is for you, and kids like you." He pointed to the land next door. "Right here. We're building a place where children, with big minds but no resources, can learn, build, and create. No fancy test scores. No money required, just talent and heart." Jayden was speechless. Over the next few weeks, something amazing happened. Desks were delivered, computers were installed, volunteers signed up, engineers, teachers, and artists all offered to help. Bryan invited kids from local shelters, orphanages, and poor neighborhoods, kids who had been ignored, pushed aside, and they came shy at first, then curious, then excited. They weren't treated like problems. They were treated like possibilities. Jayden, now more confident, became the heart of the center. He helped kids learn how to build simple machines using recycled parts. He showed them how to fix things with imagination when there were no instructions. One day, a little boy with shaky hands looked up and said, "I thought I was dumb, but now I feel smart." Jayden smiled. "You're not dumb. You just needed someone to see you." Bryan watched it all quietly from the hallway, arms crossed. His billion-dollar company still ran. His board still called. But nothing made him prouder than this place. One evening, as the kids played outside, Jayden walked up to him. "Why me?" he asked softly. "Why did you choose me?" Bryan looked at him. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. I just forgot what that felt like until you reminded me." Jayden looked down at his hands, the same ones that once held broken tools in the dirt. Now they held blueprints, ideas, and the respect of dozens of kids who saw him as a leader. And in that moment, he understood. He wasn't just Bryan's adopted son. He was becoming a builder of futures. The days grew brighter. Jayden had adjusted to school life. He was making friends. His teachers started noticing him not for where he came from, but for what he could do. His ideas were big, his hands always busy. He still fixed broken toys at recess and helped classmates with their science projects, just like he used to fix wires in the shack. One afternoon, his teacher made an announcement. "This year's State Youth Invention Fair is coming up," she said. "It's the biggest competition of the year. If you win, your project will be displayed at the National Tech Showcase in Lagos." Jayden's eyes lit up. At home, he ran to Bryan. "Can I enter?" Bryan looked at him proudly. "I was hoping you would." For the next 3 weeks, Jayden worked harder than ever. His room looked like a mini workshop. Wires, plastic, gears, notebooks filled with sketches. Bryan cleared out a small corner of his own home office just for Jayden to build Jayden's invention, a portable water purifier small enough for kids to carry, made mostly from recycled plastic and filters he learned about online. "I built this," he said. Because when my mum was sick, we used to drink rainwater. If I had this back then, maybe things would have been different. Finally, the big day arrived. Jayden stood on a large stage, his invention beside him. The hall was filled with other smart kids, some wearing uniforms from elite schools, others backed by sponsors. He stood alone. When it was his turn, he walked up, hands sweating. He began to speak, voice soft. This is a purifier. It's for kids like me, kids who live in places with no clean water. Then click. The machine stalled. Jayden froze. He tapped it, adjusted the valve. Nothing. The room was quiet. A few judges whispered. One student laughed. Jayden's eyes burned. His heart raced. He wanted to run. From the back of the room, he heard a voice. Don't quit now. It was Bryan, standing tall, hands in his pockets, calm but firm. Jayden looked at him. Bryan nodded. Failure built me. Let it build you. Jayden took a breath, closed his eyes, reset the filter. Then he spoke again. Sometimes things break, but that doesn't mean they're useless. It just means they need patience. He tapped the purifier one last time. Water began to flow. Clean, clear. The crowd gasped. Then applause began, slow at first, then louder. The judges smiled. Jayden stepped down, shaking, but smiling for real. Back in the car, trophy in his lap, Jayden looked at Bryan. Thank you for not letting me run. Bryan looked ahead and said quietly, the world already tried to break you once, but you came back stronger. That's the real invention. Jayden knew. The next day, news of the competition win spread like wildfire. Orphan turned inventor wins state tech fair. Bryan Cole's adopted son stuns judges with low-cost water purifier. From shack to spotlight, the boy who built his way out. Jayden's photo appeared on blogs, newspapers, and even the school's wall of honor. He stood in his uniform, holding his invention with a shy but proud smile. But something bigger was happening beneath the surface. The judges had quietly submitted Jayden's project to an international panel, and a week later, an email arrived. Congratulations, Jayden Cole, you've been selected to present at the Global Young Inventors Showcase in Geneva. Bryan read the message out loud. Jayden's hands flew to his mouth. He couldn't believe it. Me, all the way to Switzerland. Bryan laughed. Why not? Genius travels. At the airport, Jayden wore a suit for the first time. He didn't like the tie, but he liked the way Bryan adjusted it and said, you look like someone who belongs on the cover of Forbes. Geneva was cold but beautiful. The hall where the event was held was massive. Hundreds of kids from around the world, each with their inventions, dreams, and stories. But when Jayden's turn came, the room fell still. He walked on stage, holding nothing but a plastic jug and his invention. He didn't use big words. He just told the truth. I grew up drinking water from puddles, he said. So I built this. It's small, cheap, and anyone can use it. Because every kid should drink clean water, no matter where they're born. There was a pause. Then the room stood. Judges, parents, inventors. A standing ovation. Afterward, an official placed a medal around Jayden's neck. Not for charity, not for sympathy, for innovation. On the plane ride home, Jayden sat quietly, the medal hanging on his chest. He looked out the window, watching clouds drift past. Bryan leaned over. Proud of yourself? Jayden nodded slowly. I didn't just win, he said. I proved I belonged. Bryan smiled, eyes glistening. You never had to prove it to me, but I'm glad the world sees it now, too. When they landed, a small crowd waited at the airport. Reporters, students, even the kids from the Jayden Initiative Center. They held signs that read, Welcome home, our champion. And as Jayden walked through the crowd, people cheering his name, he realized he had gone from being the boy who fixed a car to the boy who was fixing the future. The house was quiet again. The lights were soft, the noise of reporters gone. Jayden sat in his new room, still wearing the medal from Geneva. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about awards or cameras. He was thinking about her, his mother. She hadn't seen any of it. His invention, his speech, the crowd cheering his name, and the ache of that truth sat heavy in his chest. Bryan noticed the change in him. Later that night, he knocked gently and stepped into Jayden's room. Jayden sat, cross-legged on the floor, a small old wooden box open in front of him. Inside were a few folded clothes, a photo of his mum smiling with a baby in her arms, and a crumpled envelope yellowed with age, sealed with a faded sticker. What's that? Bryan asked, sitting beside him. Jayden held up the envelope with shaking hands. A letter. My mum left it in the shack. I was too scared to open it. Until now. Bryan stayed quiet. He placed a hand on Jayden's back as the boy slowly opened the letter. The paper was thin, the handwriting soft and careful. Jayden read it aloud, voice trembling. My dearest Jayden, if you're reading this, it means you're safe. I always knew you were meant for more than dirt floors and empty pots. You were born with something special, your hands, your heart, your mind. I tried my best to hold on for you and your sister, but if I couldn't, I want you to know I never gave up on you. Don't let pain harden your heart. Let it grow your strength. And if someone comes along who sees you for who you are, not just where you came from, let them in. Let them love you. You deserve it, baby. I'm proud of you already. Love, Mum. Jayden dropped the letter into his lap and covered his face, the tears pouring out raw, real, and long overdue. Bryan didn't say anything. He simply pulled Jayden into his arms and held him tight. She was right, Bryan whispered. You are meant for more, and she'd be proud of everything you've become. Jayden hugged him back. For the first time in his life, he let someone hold all the pieces of his broken past and help him carry them into his future. That night, he placed the letter in a frame beside his bed next to the medal and a photo of his mum. She wasn't gone. Not really. She was in every step he took now, and her words had become his fuel. Months passed. Jayden's story continued to inspire people around the world, especially children who had been overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. But Bryan had one more surprise in store. One afternoon, he told Jayden to dress nicely. No hints, no clues. Just wear something important. They drove across the city to a large, freshly painted building. It had wide glass doors, smooth marble steps, and a silver plaque at the entrance that read, "The Museum of Second Chances, in honor of the ones who were never seen." Jayden blinked. A museum. Bryan smiled. Not for art, for stories, yours and others like it. Inside, the museum was warm and welcoming. The walls were filled with photos of children from shelters, refugee camps, and foster homes, each one now thriving. At the center of the room, under soft lights, was a tall glass case. Jayden stepped closer. Inside it sat his rusty old wrench from the shack, the silver flashlight Bryan had once left outside their door, a small drawing his sister had made of their family, and the original blueprints of his water purifier. At the bottom of the display, a small sign read, "These items belong to Bryan Cole, who didn't wait to be rescued. He built his own way out." Jayden covered his mouth with his hand, overwhelmed. He turned to Bryan, voice cracking. "You really did all this for me?" Bryan nodded. "No, I did it for every kid like you. You just reminded me they exist." The next room was full of inventions from other children. A girl who turned plastic bags into blankets, a boy who made shoes out of bottle caps, a teen who created solar-powered lamps for kids without electricity. Each display had a name, a face, a story. Jayden walked slowly through the room, taking it all in. This wasn't a museum of failure or pain. It was a museum of hope, of grit, of second chances. At the end of the tour, Jayden stood at the entrance again, looking back at his display. He smiled. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. Bryan placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's in every wall, every smile, every light in this place." Jayden nodded, then turned to leave, walking taller because now his past wasn't just a memory. It was a legacy. It had been exactly 2 years since Bryan's car broke down on that forgotten road. 2 years since a barefoot boy stepped out of the shadows and asked quietly, "Need help, sir?" Jayden hadn't returned to that place, not until today. The morning was quiet, the sky soft and grey. A gentle wind moved through the trees like it was remembering something too. Bryan pulled the car to a slow stop near the old, crumbling shack, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in. The walls were gone, just pieces of memory now. Jayden stepped out of the car, older, taller, with steady hands and clear eyes. He walked slowly toward the spot where the shack once stood, his little sister holding his hand. She didn't remember much, but Jayden did. Every night they shivered, every time their mum coughed in her sleep, every single hour he stayed awake just to make sure they survived another night. He stood where their mattress used to be. Bryan walked up beside him, silent. Jayden looked at the earth beneath his feet, then down the road where Bryan's car had once broken down. Then, from his backpack, Jayden pulled out a folded piece of cloth. He spread it gently on the ground. On it was sewn, with simple thread, "This is where hope began." Bryan's eyes filled. Jayden turned to him. "Do you remember what you said to Meth night I fixed your car?" Bryan chuckled a lot. "But what stuck with me was what you said. I just didn't want you to freeze." Jayden smiled. "And I didn't know that saving you would save me too." A sound interrupted them, a car in the distance. A man was pulled over, kicking the tire of his old, smoking van. A small boy sat inside, watching nervously. Jayden walked over, heart beating fast. "Need help, sir?" he asked with a grin. The man looked at him, confused. "You? No cars?" Jayden crouched down beside the engine. "Let's just say, I've had some practice." Bryan stood back, watching. His heart swelled, not because Jayden could now fix a car, but because Jayden had come full circle. From a boy dragging wires through dirt, to a young man pulling others out of it. That evening, as they drove away, Bryan looked over at him. "So, ready to take over the company yet?" Jayden laughed. "One car at a time, Mr. Cole, one car at a time." The stage lights dimmed. A hush fell over the massive auditorium as the final keynote speaker was announced at the Global Impact Summit in New York. "Please welcome philanthropist, innovator, and CEO of the Jayden Initiative Foundation, Mr. Bryan Cole." Bryan stepped up to the podium. Older now, wiser, softer. He didn't bring charts or slides, just one photograph projected onto the screen behind him. It was a photo of a small boy, barefoot, holding a broken wrench beside a rundown shack. He began, 2 years ago, I broke down on the side of a road. I thought my car was the problem. Turns out, it was me." The audience leaned in. That night, a boy appeared out of the dark. "Jayden. He fixed my car, refused money, disappeared like an angel I didn't know I needed." He paused. "But Jayden didn't just fix my engine. He fixed something in me I didn't know was broken, my purpose." He looked around the room, voice steady. "I had built skyscrapers, signed billion-dollar deals, and filled rooms with applause. But I had forgotten what it meant to build people." Jayden reminded me. The screen changed to a new photo. Jayden, standing proudly beside a group of smiling children at the Jayden Initiative Center, now in 5 countries. Bryan continued. "This boy who once scavenged parts from trash is now helping kids in places the world has ignored. And not because I saved him, but because he saved me. You see, the world doesn't need more billionaires. It needs more people who remember where they came from. It needs more Jaydens." Tears welled in many eyes. The crowd stood applauding loud, long, and full of truth. Backstage, Jayden stood watching the screen, holding his sister's hand. He wore a modest suit, his first ever tie still slightly crooked, but his eyes were calm, grounded. He didn't need to say much. He had become what the world never expected of him. A boy who had once fixed a car, now fixing hearts, fixing futures, fixing everything the world said was beyond repair. Later that night, Jayden found Bryan sitting alone in the green room, sipping tea, the applause still echoing faintly in the hallway. Jayden walked in and sat beside him. "You did good," he said. Bryan smiled, looked over, and placed a hand on Jayden's shoulder. "No, kid, you did better."